Curran was a soldier of the Kreenar people, tall and strong, with skin like pale stone and eyes that glowed faint blue in the dark. He had fought many battles in the cold skies of far worlds, but this world was different. This world was called Earth, and the humans who lived here were unlike any beings he had ever known. His mission was clear: observe the humans, learn their strengths and weaknesses, then report to the Kreenar High Command. His leaders would decide whether to offer alliance or to take the planet by force. For Curran, it was simple duty. Yet as he walked through the human camp under the dark sky, he felt something he could not name. The night air was heavy with smoke from small fires. The scent of cooked meat and strange spices filled his senses. Human soldiers sat close to the flames, their faces lit by flickering orange light. Some laughed and told stories. Others sat silent with weapons across their knees. Curran had seen warriors rest before battle many times. Yet these humans seemed different. Their laughter was not careless. It was sharp and short, hiding something beneath. And he could feel it in the air like a faint vibration. There was fear here, but it was not the fear of the weak. It was something stronger, something he did not yet understand. Curran stopped near one of the fires. A man with a rough beard and dark eyes looked up at him. The man gave a small nod, then spoke with a voice that was calm, yet heavy. Tomorrow they will come for us, and when you see them, you will understand why we do not run. Curran tilted his head, his mind processing the words. The man was Captain Rourke, the leader of this human unit. Curran had spoken with him before, and each time he had felt the strange pull of respect. Rourke was not tall compared to Curran, nor did he carry the advanced armor of the Kreenar. Yet his presence was like a wall that nothing could move. You will fight, even though you cannot win, Curran asked, his voice low. Rourke's eyes did not move from the fire as he answered. We fight because we must, because if we run there will be nothing left worth saving. Curran considered this. In Kreenar war, survival was often the only measure of victory. Yet here was a man who valued something beyond survival. It was strange, almost foolish, yet there was a power in it. Curran's communicator buzzed softly against his arm. He stepped away from the fire and pressed the device. The voice of his superior came cold and clear through the channel. You will not join their battle. You will watch only. We must know if these humans can hold against what comes. Curran felt his jaw tighten. His kind believed in strength through test. But this was no test. This was leaving allies to bleed while you waited to see if they died. He gave a short acknowledgement and ended the link, his gaze returning to the humans. They had no idea his people would not help them, and somehow that knowledge felt heavy in his chest. As the night deepened, the human camp grew quieter. Some soldiers slept on the ground with rifles close to hand. Others kept watch along the dark edge of the field. Curran wandered between the tents, listening to the low voices, hearing bits of conversation about families far away, about friends lost in past battles, about fear of what was coming at dawn. Yet each voice carried a steady weight. They knew the danger. They did not hide from it. They shaped it into readiness, and Curran felt again that strange thing in the air, fear mixed with will, like two rivers meeting in one powerful current. The moon above was pale and cold, casting silver light on the camp. Curran found himself standing at the far edge where the trees began. He looked into the darkness, his eyes shifting to the range that let him see through the black. Shapes moved there, slow and silent, far away but drawing closer with every moment. The enemy scouts were already here. He could see the faint glow of their armor, the way their limbs bent wrong, their movements smooth and unnatural. He had fought such creatures before, but only in open battle, never in the shadows like this. A shiver passed through him, and he did not know why. He turned back toward the camp, his mind restless. He could warn the humans. Yet if he did, the Kreenar command would know, and he would face judgment. The law of his people was clear: obey or be cast out. Curran had never disobeyed, but as he saw a young human soldier cleaning his weapon with slow care, the boy barely grown, eyes tired yet focused, Curran felt the weight of his choice building. This was no longer just mission. This was something else, something that reached deeper than duty. Rourke passed by and stopped near him. The captain's voice was quiet. You see them out there, don't you? Curran looked at him sharply, and Rourke gave a faint smile. We always know when they are near. The air changes, the sound changes. You will understand in the morning. Karn wanted to ask why they did not strike first, why they waited, but he already knew the answer. Humans would stand and take the fight head on, not because it was wise, but because it was who they were. Hours passed, the night crawling forward. Karn tried to rest, but his mind kept turning. The voices of his people in his ear telling him to stay clear. The memory of human faces lit by fire and shadow. The feel of that strange fear that made them stronger. He thought of home, of the Krynar's cities of stone and glass, of the honor he had earned there, and wondered if that honor meant anything here. In this place where a man could be small and fragile, yet stand taller than mountains in spirit. At last the eastern sky began to pale, a thin line of light spilling over the horizon. The humans moved quietly, readying their weapons, checking each other's gear. No one spoke loud. No one laughed now. Yet their eyes were sharp, their hands steady. Karn stood apart, torn between the cold orders of his people and the heat he felt inside. He knew the moment was close. The choice would come, and once made, it could not be undone. Somewhere in the distance, a low sound began, like metal grinding against stone, slow at first, then rising. The trees at the far edge shifted, and shapes began to appear, tall and armored, eyes burning like coals. The enemy had come, and Karn felt his pulse quicken, not from the sight of them, but from the strange truth that was dawning inside him, that before this day ended, he would have to decide who he truly was, a soldier of the Krynir, or something else entirely. Karn stood near the humans as the strange sound from the forest kept rising. It was not a roar or a cry. It was something cold and grinding, as if the world itself was being torn apart in slow, steady pieces. The human soldiers moved into positions they had practiced again and again. Some took cover behind the makeshift barricades of metal sheets and sandbags. Others crouched in the shallow trenches that cut across the ground like scars. Captain Rourke walked between them with slow steps, his eyes scanning every face, giving a short nod here, a quiet word there. No shouting, no panic, only a sense of steady control. Karn's communicator buzzed again. The soft vibration against his armor almost felt louder than the growing noise from the trees. He moved away from the humans and answered with a touch. The voice of his superior came through sharp and without warmth. You will hold your position and record what happens. You will not assist them. You will not fire unless directly threatened. The Krynir need clear data. We must know if humans are worth the risk of alliance or the trouble of conquest. Karn gave the required acknowledgement, but inside he felt a slow burn of disagreement. He could not understand how watching brave warriors die without lifting a hand could be called strength. When he returned to the barricades, Rourke was waiting for him. The human captain tilted his head slightly, as if reading Karn's mood. They told you to stand back, didn't they? Karn stayed silent, but his eyes answered for him. Rourke gave a short half-smile. That is what I expected. Your people are not the first to think we cannot stand without help. Karn looked toward the forest and asked, Can you? The captain's answer was simple and heavy. We can, but we may not survive. Karn's mind stumbled on that. If they could not survive, what meaning was in their stand? Yet something in the way Rourke said it made the words feel like a victory in themselves. The grinding sound grew louder. A strange thin mist began to creep from the shadows of the trees. The air turned colder. Karn could see the breath of the humans in pale clouds. The soldiers tightened grips on their weapons, eyes fixed ahead. No one asked what was coming. They all knew. Karn had seen such things before on other worlds. He had faced enemies with claws and armor and energy blades. But this felt different. This felt alive in a way that pressed against the skin and into the bones, as if the enemy's presence was reaching ahead of them to taste the fear it caused. A younger soldier named Harris stood near Karn, his hands steady on his rifle though his jaw was tight. He glanced at the alien warrior and said in a low voice, They are worse than they look. Karn studied him. What do they look like? Harris shook his head slowly, like nightmares you half remember, but never forget. The words settled into Karn's mind like stones in water. He looked back toward the mist and felt that strange unease deepen. Suddenly the first shapes appeared, tall forms moving with unnatural smoothness. Their armor seemed to drink the light. Their eyes burned red like the heart of a dying star. They did not rush. They walked forward with the certainty of predators that had never known defeat. Karin felt his hand twitch toward his weapon before he forced it down. Orders held him like chains, yet each step the enemy took felt like a test of those chains. Rourke stepped up onto the barricade, his voice carrying in the cold air. Hold your ground. Wait for my mark. The humans answered with short affirmations, no wasted words. Karin's gaze moved between the enemy and the humans. He could see the difference in their posture. The humans were tense but rooted, the enemy loose yet unshakable. Two kinds of readiness about to meet. The air seemed to thicken, the grinding sound now joined by a faint clicking like teeth striking together in slow rhythm. Karin realized his own breath had changed, deeper and faster. His people knew fear as a reaction to danger. But this was fear as something that reached out from the other side, something deliberate. The enemy stopped just beyond rifle range. Their leader stepped forward, taller than the rest, its armor etched with strange marks that seemed to shift under the eye. It raised one long clawed hand, and the grinding stopped. The forest went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The leader tilted its head toward Karin, and for a moment the burning eyes fixed on him alone. Karin felt the weight of that gaze like a cold hand pressing against his heart, a silent message that it knew his orders, knew his hesitation, and was already certain of the choice he would make. Without warning, the leader's claw dropped, and the enemy surged forward, moving with sudden speed that shattered the stillness. Rourke's shout cut through the air. Fire! The trenches lit with muzzle flashes. The barricades shook under the recoil of heavy weapons. The noise tore the morning apart. Karin stayed back as ordered, his weapon still cold in his hands. Yet his eyes kept finding the faces of the humans as they fought. Harris firing in steady bursts. The medic crouched, low and dragging. A wounded man to safety, Rourke reloading without breaking his gaze from the enemy. The first wave hit the barricade with a sound like metal tearing stone. Claws raked against shields. Humans fought back with bayonets and blades when the rifles were too slow. Karin saw blood spray across the mist, steam rising from it in the cold air. He could feel the heat of battle pulling at him. His people believed in calculated action, but here there was no calculation, only the raw truth of fighting to hold the line. His communicator buzzed again, the voice sharp and insistent. Do not engage. Hold position. Your data is more important than their lives. Karin looked at the small device in his hand and felt a sudden wave of disgust. He closed the channel without answering. His gaze locked on Rourke, who was now pulling a soldier back from the barricade, even as he fired his sidearm at an enemy climbing over. Karin could see the moment the barricade began to give way in places, the enemy pushing harder, the humans fighting back with every breath, the mist curling around them like some living thing eager to feed. Then Karin heard it, a sound that cut through the battle noise, high and desperate, a human child crying out from somewhere behind the lines. Karin's mind flashed to the shelter he had seen earlier, the place where civilians had been hidden away. The sound meant the enemy was too close, too deep inside the defenses. His people would do nothing, but he could not imagine standing still now. The choice that had been growing in him since the night before was now a fire in his chest. Rourke shouted for the second line to close the gap. The enemy pressed harder. Harris fell to one knee firing until his rifle clicked empty. The medic screamed for cover as she tried to reach another wounded soldier. Karin's hands clenched on his weapon, his breath harsh in his ears. The burning eyes of the enemy leader still seemed to be on him even across the chaos. Daring him to act or to fail, Karin took one step forward, then another, the chains of his orders snapping one by one inside. His mind, the cold discipline of his people, breaking under the heat of the moment. He knew now that this was not about data or strategy. It was about who he would be when the battle ended, whether he would walk away as a silent witness to the death of those who had trusted him, or whether he would stand as more than a Kreenyar soldier. He could feel the choice solidify, his body shifting into a ready stance, his weapon rising, his voice low but steady as he said to himself, "Today I choose." Karin stepped into the open ground between the barricades and the shadows of the trees, the cold mist curling around his legs, the cries of battle echoing behind him. The enemy shapes ahead, growing clearer with every breath. He had fought dangerous creatures before, but the way these beings moved set every part of his mind on edge. They did not walk like men or march like soldiers. They seemed to flow forward, their limbs bending in ways that spoke of no bone or muscle as he knew it. The dark metal of their armor seemed almost alive, shifting and rippling with strange patterns as they came closer. Their burning red eyes locked on the human line with the patience of hunters who knew the kill was certain. The leader was at the front, taller than the rest by a head, its armor marked with lines that seemed to twist when Curran tried to focus on them. As if they were not meant to be seen by mortal eyes, it carried a long weapon shaped like a blade and a spear joined together. The edge of it hummed with a faint sound that made the air feel thin. The creature's head turned toward Curran again, that same unnatural stillness in its stare, and Curran felt the pull of it like a cold rope around his thoughts, a silent challenge that seemed to say, "You have stepped forward, now prove you belong here." The human rifles cracked again, flashes of light tearing into the mist. The first enemy warriors reached the barricades and were met with steel and fire. Curran moved faster now, his long strides cutting the distance. The enemy turned toward him, the closest one breaking from the main charge to intercept, its motion smooth as water, yet faster than any beast he had hunted. Curran raised his weapon. The impact, when they met, ringing through his arms like a bell, struck deep in the earth. The force drove him back a step, the enemy's claws scraping across his armor and leaving trails of heat. Behind him the humans were shouting, the sound of grenades thumping into the enemy ranks, the mist flashing bright with sudden fire. Curran focused on his foe, every strike of blade and claw met with a block or a parry. The creature moved without waste, without hesitation, its burning eyes never leaving his. Curran felt his breath grow faster, not from weakness, but from the sharp edge of something he now knew was fear. This was no simple opponent. This was a thing built for the sole purpose of killing. The barricade to his left shuddered as another section gave way, human soldiers falling back to the second line. Rourke's voice cutting through the chaos. "Hold them there, do not break." The enemy poured through the gap, but the humans met them with knives, rifles swung like clubs, even bare hands. Curran could see the will in them, the refusal to give ground even when the ground itself was soaked with their blood, and something in him matched that will. His blade cutting harder, his stance lowering, every motion fueled by the knowledge that stepping back now would mean the humans died alone. The enemy Curran faced struck low, claws slicing for his legs. He leapt back, the move bringing him closer to the barricade where Harris had taken position again, firing past Curran's shoulder into the mist. One shot caught the creature Curran fought in the throat, the burning eyes dimming at once. It fell without a sound. Curran gave Harris a quick nod before turning to face the next threat. There was no time for more. Another enemy was already on him, this one faster, its strikes coming in a blur that forced Curran to give ground step by step toward the human lines. The mist was thicker now, curling around ankles and knees, making shapes twist and vanish at the edge of sight. Curran's senses strained to track movement. The sound of claws on metal, the crack of rifles, the screams of the wounded, each sound pulling at his focus. The enemy thrived in this chaos, darting in and out, striking at the weakest points. Curran saw one slip past a group of soldiers toward the direction of the shelter. His chest tightened. He broke from his duel and sprinted after it, his blade catching the creature just as it reached the low wall, its head snapping toward him with a hiss that was more like steam than voice. They crashed together, the wall breaking under their weight. Curran's blade driving deep, the heat of the creature's body searing his hands through the armor. It twisted violently, forcing him to hold on with all his strength. At last it went still, the burning eyes fading. Curran pulled free and turned to see the wide eyes of a small human child staring up at him from the shadow of the shelter entrance. The boy's face was streaked with dirt and tears, but he made no sound. Curran gave a short nod and turned back toward the fight without a word, his steps heavy with the weight of what almost happened. Back at the line, the humans were still holding, but the enemy kept pressing. Their leader had not yet entered the fray, standing in the mist like a dark statue, watching, waiting, Karin knew such patience meant danger. The leader would strike only when the moment was perfect, when one blow could break the will of the defenders. Rourke seemed to sense it too, his eyes scanning for that figure, even as he reloaded. The captain caught Karin's gaze for a brief moment, and in that silent look there was an understanding. Neither of them would let that moment come without a fight. Karin moved to the front again, cutting down an enemy that had climbed over the barricade, the heat and noise around him fading for a moment as he focused on the next opening. Each strike a choice, each block a promise. The humans at his side no longer looked at him as an outsider. Their movements flowed with his, covering his flanks as he covered theirs. The line was not just humans anymore. It was them together, and that thought burned brighter than the fear. The enemy leader stepped forward at last, the mist seeming to part for it, the strange marks on its armor glowing faintly now. Its weapon held low but ready. Karin could feel its gaze on him even before it moved, and when it did, it was faster than anything he had seen, the ground between them closing in the space of a breath, their weapons clashing in a burst of sparks, the force of it driving Karin back a step, then another. The leader pressed hard, each strike heavy with precision, its burning eyes filled with a calm certainty that Karin would fall. Behind him, Harris shouted a warning. Rourke's voice called for cover fire, but the leader kept Karin locked in, their fight turning in a tight circle. Every movement sharp, the sound of the battle around them fading under the weight of their clash. Karin felt the edge of his fear sharpen into something else, not panic but challenge. The knowledge that if he could hold this creature here, the humans might have a chance to push the others back. The leader's weapon cut across his chest, sparks flying as the blade scraped his armor. Karin countered with a hard strike that forced it back half a step, the first sign of resistance he had felt. He pressed forward, his breath harsh, the heat of the fight burning in his arms and legs. He could feel every eye on them now, human and enemy alike, as if the outcome here would shape the rest of the battle. The leader's burning gaze narrowed, its stance shifting, the mist curling higher as if answering its will. And Karin knew the next exchange would decide who stood and who fell. The enemy leader lunged forward with sudden force, the hum of its weapon cutting through the cold air like a living scream. Karin braced himself and met the strike with both hands gripping his blade. The impact shook through his bones, the ground beneath his feet grinding as he was pushed back. Yet he held, the humans at his side shouting as they fought to keep the rest of the enemy from breaking the line. The mist swirled thick around them, curling through the barricades like ghostly fingers, carrying the sharp scent of metal and blood. Karin's arms trembled under the weight of the leader's assault, each strike coming faster than the last, the rhythm of the fight pulling him into a place where there was no sound but the clash of weapons and the hard beat of his own heart. Behind him he could hear Rourke calling orders, moving men into position, sealing gaps in the line. The humans fought with the desperation of those who knew retreat was not an option. Every shout, every shot, every blade strike was a refusal to give ground. The leader shifted suddenly, twisting its weapon in a way Karin had never seen. The edge of the blade sliding along his arm and cutting deep into the plating. Heat seared into the wound, and the smell of scorched armor filled the air. Pain flared through him, but he stepped in closer instead of back, his own blade rising in a sharp arc that forced the leader to turn away, sparks spraying from the clash. The humans nearby took the chance to fire, bullets sparking against the leader's armor, making it pause for half a breath. That breath was enough for Karin to push forward, his shoulders slamming into the creature's chest, driving it back a step. The humans roared in unison and surged with him, pushing the enemy line away from the breach. Karin felt the surge of unity, the way their movements matched his without thought, Harris at his left cutting down an enemy that tried to flank them, the medic behind them dragging the wounded to safety while still firing with one hand, the barricade that had nearly fallen now, holding firm through sheer will. The leader recovered and struck again, its weapon whistling through the air. Karin met it, sparks and heat bursting between them, his grip steady despite the ache in his arms. His eyes locked on those burning red orbs. He could feel the intent there, the weight of a mind that believed itself unstoppable, and somewhere deep inside him a flame answered, a voice that said not here, Not today. The leader's strikes came heavier now, testing his strength. Yet every time Curran gave ground it was, only to turn and drive back harder, the humans filling the space with fire and steel. Around them the battle raged, the mist now streaked with flashes of light from rifle fire, the cries of the wounded mixing with the growl of defiance from the defenders. Curran could feel the ground trembling under the movement of so many bodies, the air thick with heat and smoke, every breath sharp in his lungs. The enemy pressed, but the humans met them at every point, not with numbers or superior weapons, but with a kind of strength Curran had never seen, a strength that seemed to grow with each loss rather than fade. The leader feinted left, then came in low, its blade slicing for Curran's legs. He dropped into a crouch and blocked with the flat of his weapon, the impact ringing through his bones. He twisted and brought his elbow into the side of the creature's head. The sound was dull, but it staggered slightly. The human seized the opening, Harris firing 2 quick bursts into the enemy's torso, sparks dancing across the strange armor. Curran followed with a heavy downward strike that sent the leader back. Another step, its footing uncertain for the first time. The humans shouted again, their voices rising like a tide. The push from the enemy line slowed. Curran could see hesitation in some of the lesser foes, their movements less certain, their strikes not as sharp. The leader's burning gaze flicked across the field, reading the shift, and Curran knew it was thinking of how to break them again. He could not allow that. He stepped forward, blade raised, his voice carrying over the roar of battle as he called to the humans, "Hold with me." The answer came as a wall of sound, their will joining his in one unbroken surge. Together they moved, Curran leading through the gap, the humans close at his sides, striking down the enemy as they pressed forward. Every inch reclaimed felt like more than ground. It felt like proof that they could stand against anything. The leader met him again in the center, their blades locking, the heat of the clash burning in the cold mist, the sound of it ringing across the line. Curran pushed with everything he had, the strain in his arms and legs almost breaking him. Yet the thought of stepping back never entered his mind, not while the humans fought beside him. The leader broke the lock with a sudden twist, spinning away and striking low again. Curran leapt back, the blade missing his legs by the width of a breath. He countered with a quick slash across the enemy's arm, the glow and the strange marks along its armor flaring bright, then dimming. A sound escaped the leader, not a cry, but something closer to a hiss, the first sign that it could feel the fight wearing at it. Curran's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening, the humans around them pressing harder now, sensing the shift in momentum. The mist swirled higher, wrapping around them until it felt like the whole world was this single fight, every sound and motion part of it. The ground beneath their feet slick with blood and mud, Curran's breath steady now despite the pounding of his heart, his body moving with the rhythm of the humans beside him, their weapons and his blades striking in unison, the enemy falling back step by step, even the leader giving ground under the weight of their combined will, each moment stretching long and sharp in his mind. A sudden explosion tore through the enemy flank. One of the human heavy gunners had set a charge. The blast sent shards of metal and earth into the air, the shockwave pushing the mist away for a heartbeat. In that brief clarity, Curran saw the leader stagger, its footing breaking. He stepped in without hesitation, his blade coming down with all the strength left in him. The clash shook his arms to the shoulder, the leader driven to one knee, the burning eyes lifting to meet his with a mix of fury and something that might have been respect. Rourke's voice rang out behind him. "Push them now," and the humans surged forward, the enemy line breaking under the force. Curran pressed the leader back again, the red glow of its eyes narrowing. It struck hard, their blades locking once more, the pressure between them like a storm, neither yielding, the humans driving the rest of the enemy into retreat. The leader looked past Curran to see its forces falling, then back to him. And Curran knew the fight was not yet won, but the moment belonged to them. Here and now they stood. The sky over the battlefield was the color of ash and fire, as if the heavens themselves could not decide whether to mourn or rage, and the wind carried with it the bitter scent of smoke and the faint metallic tang of blood. And for Yerrick, every breath felt heavy, like he was pulling in the weight of the world with each inhale, and the lines of soldiers, both human and alien, stood facing an enemy that none of them truly understood but all feared deeply. Their weapons clutched tight, their eyes darting to the horizon where shadows twisted and moved in ways that defied logic and reason. Jarek's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his grip on the pulse rifle, not from weakness, but from the knowledge of what was coming, for they had fought these creatures before, and every time they had done so the cost had been almost unbearable, yet here they were again with no choice but to stand their ground, for retreat meant the end of everything, and every heartbeat felt like a drum calling him to the edge of something final. He glanced to his right and saw Commander Hale, a man whose eyes were as sharp as the blades he carried, moving between the lines, offering quick words and short nods to keep morale from crumbling. Hale's presence was a strange comfort in this chaos, a reminder that even in the darkest of places there could be order and resolve, and Yerrick found himself straightening his posture just from seeing him near. On his left, a young human soldier, barely old enough to have seen his first true battle, gripped his weapon so tightly his knuckles had turned pale, the boy's breath quick and uneven, as if every second was a struggle against the fear trying to choke him. Yerrick leaned slightly and murmured low words of steady encouragement, telling him that fear was natural, but letting it rule you was the same as letting the enemy win, and the boy nodded, swallowing hard, and returning his gaze to the horizon where the threat loomed ever closer. The ground beneath them began to hum, a low vibration that Yerrick felt in his bones, and he knew the enemy was near before the first shapes emerged from the smoke and hazed their forms, shifting in ways that hurt the eyes to watch, their limbs too long, their movements too fast and unnatural. They seemed to glide and lurch at the same time, a living nightmare of speed and hunger, and the air grew colder, as if their very presence drained the warmth from the world. Hale barked an order, and the line braced, weapons lifting in unison as the first wave broke through the veil of smoke, the sound of gunfire and energy bolts ripping through the air, a chaotic symphony of destruction and desperation. And Yerrick moved with practiced precision, each shot aimed, each movement purposeful, his focus narrowing until there was nothing but the target and the need to bring it down before it could reach the line. The creatures shrieked, a sound like metal tearing mixed with the wail of something dying yet unwilling to let go, and it cut through the air like a blade, rattling the nerves of every soldier who heard it. But still they fought, and still they held the line, even as the first of the creatures slammed into them with the force of a storm, knocking men and women off their feet, tearing through armor as if it were nothing more than paper. Yerrick found himself face to face with one of the monsters, its eyes a deep and burning red that seemed to see through him, its mouth a jagged maw of teeth that dripped with something black and foul, and for a heartbeat he felt the raw animal terror of prey before predator. But he forced it down, let instinct take over, and drove his blade into the creature's side, feeling the resistance of its strange flesh before it gave way with a wet shudder. The monster screamed and lashed out, but Yerrick was already moving, pulling the blade free and firing a burst into its head, the recoil slamming into his shoulder, even as the creature fell twitching to the ground. And there was no time to think, no time to feel, as another surged forward, and he met it with steel and fired, the battlefield around him a blur of motion and sound. To his left, the young soldier cried out as one of the creatures lunged at him, and without thinking, Yerrick dove forward, knocking the boy aside, and meeting the creature head on, his rifle swinging up to fire point blank, the blast tearing through the thing's skull and spraying dark ichor across the ground, and the boy stared wide-eyed, but Yerrick only nodded sharply before turning back to the fight, for there would be time for thanks later if they lived. The enemy pressed harder, their numbers seeming endless, each one as relentless as the last, and the human line began to buckle, in places the sheer weight of the assault forcing them back step by step, and Hale's voice rose above the chaos, ordering the flanks to hold, commanding them not to give an inch, for every meter lost would be one they could never regain, and Yerrick felt the truth of those words in the ache of his arms and the burn of his lungs as he fought on. Explosions lit the sky as artillery from the rear lines found their marks, tearing into clusters of the enemy and buying the front some breathing space. But it was never enough, never for long, and soon they were upon them again, their screeches mingling with the cries of the wounded and dying, and still Yarrick moved, fought, killed, because the alternative was unthinkable. Somewhere in the chaos, he saw Hale take down 3 of the monsters in quick succession, his movement sharp and deadly, but then another leapt from the smoke, catching him off guard, and Yarrick felt his heart lurch as he fought his way toward the commander, but the press of bodies, both human and alien, made the distance seem impossible, and the last he saw was Hale disappearing beneath a wave of clawed limbs and gnashing teeth, and Jarrick's roar of rage was lost in the noise. He fought harder, then, driven by something beyond survival, beyond fear, his strikes fueled by fury and desperation, carving a path through the enemy, with the single goal of reaching Hale. But by the time he broke through, there was nothing left but torn armor and the still form of a man who had stood as a pillar among them. And for a moment, Yarrick could not move, could not breathe, as the world seemed to narrow to that single terrible sight. But the battle raged on around him, and there was no time to grieve, no space for anything but the fight. And so he rose, his heart heavy, his hand steady, and he took his place once more in the line, because that was what Hale would have done. And in that moment, Yarrick knew that this was what choosing humanity truly meant, standing, even when the weight was too much, fighting, even when the cost was more than he could bear, holding the line, because if they did not know, one else would. The enemy did not stop, they did not tire, they did not fear. But neither did the humans now, for they had something far stronger than numbers or strength. They had each other. And as the sun broke weakly through the smoke above, casting light over the battlefield, Yarrick lifted his rifle and faced the next wave with eyes that held no fear, only the unshakable resolve of someone who had chosen his place and would not be moved. The air was thick with dust and smoke as the sky above the broken city turned a strange shade between red and gold. The sound of falling stone and distant fire roared in the ears of every soldier and alien who stood on that cracked ground. But among them all, only one figure felt the weight of what had just happened, heavier than the armor on his chest. He moved forward slowly, his boots scraping over shattered glass and twisted metal, his heart pulling him toward the shadow of a ruined tower where the humans had vanished minutes ago. He could hear their voices, faint but strong, even as the wind carried the scent of burning oil and blood, and it filled him with a strange mix of hope and fear. Hope, because they were still alive; fear, because he knew what hunted them now. The creature had been spoken of only in whispers among his own kind, of thing older than any war they had fought, a hunter that cared nothing for sides or oaths or banners. It fed only on courage and would not stop until it broke the will of every living thing in its path. And as he stepped over a collapsed wall, he saw the first sign of a claw mark deep and wide in the stone, as if the rock itself had been made of soft clay. He felt his hands tremble, though the air was warm. He told himself he had stood against worse, but in the back of his mind he knew that was not true, not this time. The humans were gathered at the far end of a narrow street, their weapons raised, their eyes scanning every shadow and corner. Their commander, a tall woman with dust smeared across her cheek, gave quick orders to her team, her voice sharp but steady. She did not notice him at first as he approached, but when she did, her gaze locked on his, and for a moment there was no sound, only the silent exchange of trust and unspoken promises. He nodded once, and she returned it without words, then turned back to the street ahead. They moved together through the ruins, each step measured, each breath heavy. The sound of claws scraping stone came from somewhere above them. But every time they looked, the rooftops were empty. Still they knew it was there, watching, waiting. The shadows seemed to move with them, sliding along the walls and shifting with the flicker of distant firelight. His pulse quickened as they passed the open shell of a building, and the air suddenly grew colder. The smell of iron was strong here, stronger than before. A faint whisper brushed past his ear, but when he turned, no one was close enough to have spoken. He gripped his weapon tighter, his eyes scanning the dark corners of the street ahead. Then, without warning, the ground beneath them shook, a deep rumble rolling through the earth like the growl of some buried giant. Debris fell from the walls around them, and one of the humans stumbled, catching himself against a broken beam. The commander signaled for them to keep moving faster. They reached an open square littered with broken statues and burned vehicles. The space felt too wide, too exposed. Every instinct in him screamed that they should not stay here, yet the only way forward was across. He looked to the commander, and she nodded. They moved into the square, their boots crunching over shattered stone, and glass the sound echoing off the surrounding ruins that it came. From the shadow of a fallen tower, a shape stepped forward slow and deliberate, its form shifting as if it were made of smoke and flesh at the same time, tall enough to blot out the burning sky behind its eyes, glowing with a pale, sick light. The humans froze for only a second before raising their weapons. He felt his breath catch as the thing turned its gaze on them, the air around them growing colder still. The first shot rang out and echoed into the ruins, the bullet striking the creature and passing through as though it were nothing but mist, yet the impact made it turn its head and fix its glowing eyes on the shooter. The human staggered, as if an invisible hand had gripped his chest and squeezed hard. The commander shouted for them to spread out, to keep moving, but the creature moved faster than the eye could follow. One moment, it was across the square, the next, it was among them. He swung his weapon at it, striking only air, yet a cold sting burned across his arm, as if the creature's shadow had cut through him. He stumbled back, but did not fall, his training and instinct keeping him upright. A human soldier fired again, this time aiming for the glowing eyes. The creature flinched a little, enough to show it could be hurt somehow. The commander caught his gaze and shouted above the chaos to aim for the light. They fought as a single unit, alien and human, side by side, their shots and strikes focused on the pale glow in the shadowed face of their enemy. Each hit making it step back little by little, yet it never stopped moving, never stopped reaching for them. One soldier fell, another screamed as dark tendrils wrapped around his leg, pulling him toward the edge of the square. He rushed to help, swinging his blade into the tendril, which burst into smoke at the touch. The soldiers scrambled free, and they kept fighting. Then the creature let out a sound like nothing he had ever heard, a cry that was both roar and whisper, filling the air with a deep vibration that made his vision blur for a moment. Every flame in the square bent toward it, as if drawn by some unseen force. The cold grew sharper, biting into skin and bone. The commander gave the signal to fall back toward the narrow street behind them, and they moved together, covering each other step by step. But the creature did not chase, it simply watched as they retreated, its glowing eyes fixed on him alone. And in that moment, he felt something pass between them, a promise perhaps, or a warning he did not understand, yet it made his stomach twist and his breath come faster. He knew this was not over. The way the light in its eyes flared told him it had marked him and that it would find him again, no matter how far he ran. They reached the safety of the narrow street, and the commander ordered them to keep moving until they reached the defensive line. Humans and alien alike limped through the debris, their faces pale from cold and fear. He stayed near the rear, watching the shadows behind them. But the creature did not follow, not yet. The whispers had stopped, and the air began to warm, though the sense of being watched never left. As they walked, he thought of what it meant to choose humanity over his own kind. He thought of the price he might have to pay for that choice, and whether this enemy would make that cost higher than he could bear. The commander slowed her pace until she was beside him, her voice low. As she asked if he was all right, he nodded, though the truth was far from it. She gave him a look that said she did not believe him, but she did not press. Ahead, the ruins opened to reveal the faint glow of human fortifications, a promise of rest and shelter. Yet, as they neared the gates, he could not shake the feeling that this was only a brief pause. The war was far from over, and the creature in the ruins was only the beginning. He knew that fear now had a face, and it was watching from the dark, waiting for the moment to strike again, and when it did, he would be there with the humans at his side, ready or not. The wind carried the smell of burnt metal and dust through the torn battlefield as the last echoes of distant blasts rolled away like fading thunder, and the soldier, known as Kale, stood still with his hand resting on the chipped edge of his rifle, feeling the cold weight of the moment pressing into his chest, while his eyes searched for any sign of life among the smoke and shadows that swirled like restless spirits across the ruined ground. He had chosen this path. We turned his back on his own kind to stand with the humans, and now here he was staring at the cost of that choice. In the distance he saw movement, small at first, then growing clearer as the smoke thinned and the shapes of survivors came into view. Their armor cracked, their faces streaked with sweat and ash, but their eyes still burning with that stubborn human fire he had seen since the first day he met them. They carried each other forward, some limping, some leaning on their rifles, as if they were part of their own bones, yet none of them stopped, none of them gave in, and Kale felt something inside him tighten. Not with fear now, but with something heavier, something like pride. But the silence was a lie, and Cale knew it, for under the low hum of the scorched air, there was a deeper sound of vibration in the earth, like the footsteps of something vast and merciless, and he realized the enemy was not finished. The main force had pulled back, not to retreat, but to regroup, and the humans would not have the strength to meet them again, not like this, not without help that would never arrive in time. Cale turned toward the shattered comms post where Captain Arden stood, leaning over the faint blue light of the last working display, his jaw tight, his voice a low growl, as he issued orders to men who barely had the strength to lift their heads. The captain glanced up when Cale approached, and in that look there was no question, no accusation, only a silent demand for the truth. Cale spoke quickly, telling him what he felt in the ground, what was coming, what it meant. And Arden only nodded, his face hard, but his eyes flicking for a heartbeat toward the wounded huddled behind the broken barricades. "We cannot move them," Cale said, his voice rough. "We cannot fight again, not like this." Arden knew, and Cale could see him thinking through choices that were no choices at all, until Cale stepped forward and offered the one thing that could still work: a distraction, not a small one, not a feint, but something so large and loud it would pull the enemy from the humans entirely, even if it meant he would not come back. Arden stared at him for a long second, then reached out and clasped his arm, not in thanks, not in farewell, but in the silent bond of warriors who had no need for more words. Cale moved fast, gathering what gear he could carry and strapping on charges taken from the last intact crates. Every step he took was heavy yet steady, because he knew there was no other way. He passed through the human lines, their tired faces lifting as they saw him, some trying to speak, some reaching out, but he only nodded back, letting them see the calm in his eyes before he slipped into the broken streets beyond. The city was a skeleton of stone and steel now, its towers half gone, its roads cracked open to the roots of the world, yet it still held shadows deep enough to hide his path. Cale moved through them, hearing the enemy's approach, growing louder, their machines grinding the ground to dust, their voices sharp and alien in the still air, and he felt the beat of his heart match the rhythm of their march. He reached the old transit hub where the roof had fallen and the glass lay in glittering shards, and there he set his trap, laying the charges across the pillars and walls, threading the wires like veins through a dying body, all while the sound of the enemy grew like a storm at his back. When it was ready, he climbed to the highest point still standing and looked out over the ruins one last time. The enemy came into view, then endless ranks of armored forms moving with perfect cold precision, their weapons like claws, their banners snapping in the wind, and Cale felt a strange calm as he stood in their sight, his figure clear against the burning sky. He raised his rifle and fired, not to kill, but to draw every gun, every mine toward him, and it worked. The entire front shifted toward his lone shape, the roar of their machines rising as they surged forward. Cale waited until they were close enough that he could see the reflections in their armor. Then he touched the trigger in his hand, and the world became fire. The ground heaved, the walls shattered, the air itself seemed to burn as the blast ripped through the ruins, throwing enemy ranks into the sky like leaves in a storm. He felt the heat slam into him, felt the light swallow the shadows, and in that moment, there was no fear, only the certainty that this was the choice he had made, and he would make it again. Far behind the lines, the humans felt the shockwave roll over them and saw the fire bloom high enough to burn against the clouds, and they knew without being told what Cale had done. They rose with what strength they had and pushed forward through the stunned enemy lines, cutting a path to freedom, carrying their wounded and their dead with them, and never looking back until the smoke hid the place where Cale had stood. Days later, when the humans were safe in the hills and the first light of dawn touched the land, they built a small cairn of stones for the warrior who had chosen them over his own kind and faced the true terror without turning away. They did not know if his body lay under the ruins or if the blast had taken him entirely, but they spoke his name as if he could still hear them carried in the wind across the broken world, and in that way he remained with them, not as a ghost, but as a part of the story. They would tell for as long as they could speak, and in the silence between their words there was something else, a feeling none of them could name, yet all of them understood, a reminder that sometimes the greatest strength is not in surviving, but in choosing the moment to stand and to give everything for something greater than yourself. And in that truth, There was no fear, only the enduring fire of what it meant to be human and to be worthy of standing beside them always.